Well, in 2018, the government launched the National Energy Policy, a document which was meant to steer the country's energy sector for a long time to come. Almost 5 years down the line, what have we achieved through this document? Joining us on Inside Government tonight, we talk to Dr. Eng.Joseph Njoroge. He's the Principal Secretary in charge of Energy. He was part of the architect that developed this critical document. He's going to help us understand what have we managed to achieve through this document, the challenges, and of course, the way ahead. Thank you so very much indeed, Dr. for finding time to be with us. Since we developed the National Energy Policy, what difference has it made in Kenya's energy sector?
I have had the privilege and the opportunity to have been in this sector for many years. And I start by saying that in 2002, when the NAC government came into power, we had about 680,000 customers in the sector. And the reason why I want to use customers is because when everything is done in the energy sector, all the way from generation, transmission, and therefore if we are talking about achieving middle income status, then we must focus on more consumption of electricity. If we are talking about industrialization, we really must provide that power that is able to spur industrialization, power which is reliable, power which is competitively priced, sustainable, and power which is affordable. So when you mix all those, we saw the need now, because we had come up with that very focused pace of electrification, that we put together the lessons that we have learned since the inception of the power sector. I know we have had some setback, particularly because of the resources, slowdown due to the pandemic and other competing challenges. But we of course see that by the year 2022, we will have an average close to 85 to 90% access to electricity. We will have some, what I would want to say, scattered areas which may be very far from the grid, which will not be accessed with the grid power, but will be accessed with what we are calling off-grid solutions. But by 2025, I think we should have...
We should achieve universal.
Yeah, everything going the right way. And assuming that we will not have setbacks, we should be able to see universal access, which will be five years ahead of what was anticipated in the initial Vision 2030.
And the document was talking about, upscaling our energy generation capacity from the then 1,600 megawatts to around 5,000 megawatts, by the year 2020. We know we have not achieved this because we are at 26, 27, thereabout. So what informed, or why have we missed these targets?
We have missed this target, Brian, because in power systems and electrification strategies, you must always balance between supply and demand. If you oversupply, if you have excess supply, it's an investment, and therefore it will raise the cost of power, because there are some fixed costs for power plants which must be met, and which will lead to cost, additional cost, and still that cost would have to be paid by the economy. So if you oversupply, you raise the cost of power. If you undersupply, you create an economy which has lost opportunities. You lose a lot of opportunities of growth. In actual fact, I remember one time when we were going through the opportunity cost of losing, for example, 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. It was about 20 US cents, and that is from the World Bank study. That when we are losing an opportunity to use 1 kilowatt hour, we are losing much more than the cost of that 1 unit of electricity. Because there are a lot of what I would call cascade benefits of having the power. Because you'll have an industry, you have employees, you will have suppliers of that industry, you have those products, distributors. You know, it's a very complex web of economic activities that you lose when you subject the economy to power rationing. Yeah. And we went through it. We went through it in the early years. I remember in 1997 and even the year 2000, and I was in charge of Nairobi as a regional manager. And I went through a very painful period in my career because we were rationing electricity. This is an industrialist. He comes to you to plead not to switch off the power. Because if you switch off the power, you have destroyed all my raw materials. But I was helpless because we didn't have enough power. So at certain times, we used to switch off power. Even parents used to come to see me. We are switching off power because my estate is very close to an industrial area. But my children are studying at night, yet you are switching me off. And these children are going to do exams. You can imagine the pain of such a complainant to you, that you are helpless, that children cannot read at night because you have to ration electricity. If there is anything, if there is any, I would say if there is any achievement that I have seen being made by the efforts we are making, and I know there are very many challenges that we have. I know we have not been able to satisfy people with enough low-cost power. We have not gone into the cost of power low enough as people would desire. We are still not as reliable as we would want people to be. But one achievement we have made is we have reduced almost to zero rationing of electricity. Indeed, the only rationing that possibly happens is because of some challenges of the system itself, not because we do not have sufficient generation.
You were talking about, per capita power usage in Kenya. We are less than 200 kilowatt hours per person. When you compare with, our peers in the market, and I would say South Africa and Egypt, you're talking about, South Africa almost 600 kilowatt hour, per person. How then do we plan not only to ensure that there is affordable energy, there is also reliable, but also upscale the per capita use of energy in this country?
I think the per capita use of energy in this country will be achieved through small, medium, and big industries. That power which we have distributed all over the country, in the urban, peri-urban, and even in the rural areas, we are expecting that power to be used for small-scale industries, cottage industries, what I would want to call even agro-processing. Because when we talk even about food security, Brian, electricity is one of the main enablers of food security. You know very well that oftentimes we overproduce agricultural products. But because of lack of capacity of conservation of what we have overproduced, it's lost. In Nyandarua, you can get statistics of a lot of food that is given to the cows or wasted because of several reasons, mainly that it is very hard to get to the market for those products, number one. Number two, there are no methods of preservation of those products to be used later, either by the same people or even to be used elsewhere. So preservation is so important, and if we see more industries of preservation, we will enhance the utilization of power. So small industries, cottage industries, people in those urban areas, it's welding, small jobs of making windows and so on. We want those jobs to be made in the rural areas. And because of devolution, and considering that now we are even going to increase the resources into the devolved unit, I have no doubt that the electricity, which we have very aggressively expanded to the rural areas, peri-urban areas, will soon be very useful. We will reap the benefits of that work that we have done when we start using that electricity for those purposes I'm talking about: preservation, small industries, cottage industries, agro-processing. And that's when even our GDP will go up. And also our per capita consumption of electricity will also go up. And when our per capita consumption of electricity goes up, it also helps to reduce the cost of electricity. Remember, we have got generators, and these generators have what we call fixed costs. And if we are not utilizing those generators full scale, it means that the fixed cost is distributed amongst the few customers who are connected or who are consuming power. But if we increase the number of units that are utilized, it means those fixed costs will be spread out to more units of power, and therefore that will actually bring down the retail tariff.
There's a correlation between per capita energy use and the cost of power. We must appreciate the fact that tremendous achievement or progress has been made in lowering the cost of power in this country from as high from a high of 20 cents US dollar, 20 US dollar cents, about 10 years ago, to what now we are enjoying about 13 cents US dollars.
Okay. The average, the industrial is about 14 US cents.
But there is room to bring this down. How do we plan to achieve this?
We plan to achieve this through in many ways. One of the methods is losses. We've got quite some significant losses in the system. We call them technical losses. And we mitigate those losses by expanding our transmission system and making sure that the user of electricity also has an efficient system, which is not overusing, or which is not using too much power to produce the goods that that person is producing. That is called efficiency. And in this ministry, we actually have a section that focuses on the efficiency. Currently, they are concentrating on industries, and we do have a partnership with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Yeah. And we have a period of time when we reward those who are quite efficient in their utilization of power. So we look at that utilization all the way up to the last mile, that your items, your equipment are efficient. Two, we make sure that the conveyance, the transportation of electricity is efficient, and there are less losses within that system. Then we have got other losses called commercial losses. And those are the main losses that really impact on the cost of electricity, especially those who are stealing power. There are so many people who are stealing power, so many people who interfere with the meters so that they pay less. And once those losses increases, it means that KPOC buys 100 units from the generators, but is only able to to sell 80 units, because 20 units have been lost en route. Part of it has been lost through the lines. That is what we call technical losses. The other, which we are mitigating by making sure that we upgrade those lines, or we even create alternative routes for the power, so that you don't have to transport too much of it using the same lines. And then the other one is to make sure that even where you take it, it is not underestimated, or it is not stolen. So you are getting the power to the customer fairly and firmly, without any losses within his system or within the outside system.
I know there has been a significant diversification in terms of our energy mix, but as a country, the desire is to move completely to renewable energy, or what you would call clean energy by the year 2030. But still, on the other end, there are talks about investing in coal energy. Do we have a clash of policies here?
Coal and even some of other clean energy, what we call clean energy. Natural gas is clean energy. Even nuclear is clean energy. Clean because the emissions are effectively mitigated. Even when we were planning to put a coal plant, which has been impeded by court cases and what I would call activists, we were making sure that that plant will have very minimal emissions, because there is technology. We were actually using the most sophisticated technology, which we call supercritical. And this is achieved by having very efficient processing of that coal with minimal emission. So there is no clash of policy. We are still going to make sure that we achieve reduced emissions, and therefore it will be clean energy.
Talk about the IPPs, and there are some argument in some quarters that the reason why we haven't seen a proper reduction of costs of energy in this country is because they are very old IPPs agreement that were done, and they have made somehow the reduction of energy cost to be next to impossible. Are we looking at a situation whereby we are likely to phase out IPPs in our energy mix?
Okay, IPPs, most of them are contracted for a duration of 20 years. And quite a good number of them are about to expire. I think one has already expired. I think the other one is expiring towards the end of this year. The others would have maybe a balance of a few more years. These IPPs are done with that duration of 20 years purely for the purpose of spreading the cost, the capital investment of that power plant for a longer period, so that we do not burden the customer with such a high cost initially because of the payments of the loans, because most of them are done with what we call project financing, which is a mix of equity and debt. In fact, that mix of equity and debt is also very sensitive to the cost. We always make sure that the gearing ratio is good, so that there is more of debt, which has less cost than equity. Because when you use equity, you expect a higher return. The providers of equity always expect higher return on their investment than the debt. So we look at all those very important factors when we are getting the investment. And by the way, this is a regulated industry, and therefore any investor who comes to undertake construction of a power plant must pass through stages where he provides what we call open book to the regulator. The regulator must, and even the off-taker, both the off-taker and the regulator must scrutinize the open book of the investment of any proposal before it is approved.
Very well. As we wind up, let's talk about, another baby project of the Jubilee administration, the last mile connectivity. I know phase 1 is complete and phase 2, if I'm not wrong. So what is remaining is phase 3 and phase 4. When do we plan to start these 2 phases, and what are we likely to achieve at the end of the day?
Okay, phase 2, I know there are some remnants of phase 2 which are still going on. Phase 3 is a World Bank project which focuses mainly on what we call off-grid areas, and some of the projects have already started. Quite a good number of off-grid plants have already been put up. I know LELEC have already put about 22 off-grid stations outside there. KPOC also, who usually maintains those off-grid, has upgraded quite a good number of them. And we do also have some facilitated private investors in some off-grid solutions, like we have lamps which are sold to those people who cannot be able to access solar lamps, and even other solar systems which are used by many investors. So we do have a mix of products that are suitable for various areas, and the World Bank portfolio is about 150 million USD, which is going to be focused on yes. No, that's about 160 billion, almost 160, depending, of course, on the foreign exchange rate, and it's going to mainly be applied in those very distant areas from the grid, and we expect that we'll be able to cover largely most of those off-grid areas using that facility. The other facility, which is a combination of AFD and European Union, is just about to be finalized. I think the process is still in Treasury, and we should expect that it's going to be less durational for about two years or so. We expect by 2022, 2023 that we will have utilized that facility. And we also do have several other options. We have JICA coming on board with some facility, focusing on some areas in Kwale and some areas in Nakuru. We've got a combination of very, very, very many initiatives, because for achievement of such a very big dream like universal access, you've got to do a mix of very many. Even the government itself, the Exchequer, we have had a lot of support from the government. Good. In actual fact, the success of this last mile, which is actually the enabler of having grown more than three times of power. For the last only 7 years, we have grown more than 3 times what we had. That enabling environment has been created by the generosity and focus of the Jubilee government in terms of injecting what we call counterpart funding from Treasury, and also supporting the power sector with loans which means government money, the loans from concessional lenders. In the shortest time possible, where do you see the energy sector in the next 5 years? In the next 5 years, based on very many other expected developments, like we are looking at LAPSET, we are looking at Konza, we are looking at ports like Lamu Port, we are looking at even electrification of the SGR. I see the energy sector playing a very major enabling role to the rest of the economy. Even when we talk about the big four, we talk about the food and nutrition security. When we talk about universal health care, when we talk about housing, and when we talk about manufacturing, all of them are heavily dependent on the energy sector. And with our dream of having universal access, at least in the next 5 years, we should have universal access. And therefore, power will be available almost everywhere in this country.
Good.
And all those big dreams and those very critical projects of the big four will clearly and effectively be enabled by the energy sector, and therefore playing a very crucial role in the socio-economic development of our country.
Thank you very much indeed, Doctor, for finding time to be with us and, of course, to enumerate some of the achievements that we have gone through and, of course, the challenges and how we plan to overcome them. Of course, power is very critical. Energy is very critical to the development of our country. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you to Brian. I think it has been a pleasure having you and allowing me to talk to Kenyans, because I know KBC is Kenya. Kenyans about our journey in this sector and what we anticipate to see in the near future about the role of the energy sector in our country, which is critical. And what we always say is that the energy sector is the engine of the economy of our country. Thank you.
Well, so thank you very much indeed for finding time to be with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Dr. Engineer Joseph Njoroge is the PS in charge of energy, joining us on Inside Government to help us understand where are we in terms of energy generation and, of course, transmission. You have heard it from him. My name is O'Brien Kimani. This is Inside Government. Thank you for your time. Good night.